G'day legends, I hope that you're having a really great day. Now, first off, we're going to have a look at the maps and we're going to talk about Krynky because I do think there is a bit of information out there that may be slightly wrong and some people are just blatantly ignoring what is going on here as well. We're going to talk about the potential funding for Ukraine stuck in Congress, where that may go, as well as domestic industrial capability for Ukraine. And of course, a look at the World Economic Forum. As we know, many of the Ukrainian officials are there making statements day to day, and the big players of the world have taken their private jets there while you and I have the paper straws of McDonald's and we are the problem. But where we're going to go, we're going to have a look on the maps very first and then look at Krynky. So, of course, we have the map of Ukraine here, and this is the capital here, Kyiv. The red areas are occupied since 22 by Russia and the purple since 14, this being, of course, Crimea down here and the Dnieper River running through here. This is Russia around here. Now, we know that this river creates this natural blockade between here because you've got to cross over this. Now, we've speculated before about could this freeze to the point where armor could move across this river. We looked at a few graphs about from the US, like Transport Corps, about when they can drive heavy vehicles across. And from what we looked at, it doesn't ever freeze enough to actually take armor across this. So it would be more of an amphibious operation. And so far with this, we have seen mobile bridges bought where Russia took vehicles across into Kherson, where this green part is where they occupied at one point. But as far as just driving across, no. And the movement we're seeing across from the right to the left bank is done by boat. We're seeing a lot of footage of those boats being hit with things like Lancet drones as well as FPV drones. Now, one thing which is very known here, no secret, Russia has lost a hell of a lot of troops and vehicles here. And just a quick search will absolutely prove this. And you'll also see there's been a lot of Ukrainian losses. And people ask, why risk these assets, these humans by Russia and Ukraine for such a small area, this small bridgehead here? And this is because it is incredibly important. This is down in Kherson, the only area on the left bank that Ukraine really control and to move through here. But it is a small area. Now, this is the deep state map. So we're talking, let's go 2.5 or 2.6 kilometers west to east and north to south, maybe 500 meters, depending what you want to call in here. But as far as where the cover is, 500 meters. So this is a very small area. This is why the artillery can be very effective. That said, this is why the artillery back from the right side where Ukraine control into where Russia control can be very effective as well, because the supply routes through here are very strong. We have seen Russia get hit here, but this is a very, very important area on the front line. And we've spoken before that a meter, a kilometer, 100 meters in one area is far more or less important than other areas. In this area in particular, this is incredibly important. And I do have a little bit of footage that I'll show you here from only a few months ago compared to today of exactly how this is now looking. And you can just see how destroyed everything is in here. If you're talking this small area, Russia's using a hell of a lot of glide bombs, large munitions in here, 500 kilogram bombs. A lot of artillery gets absolutely flattened. And saying that Ukraine can actually hold this bridgehead here is an absolute credit to them and the defensive works that have actually taken place here. But I digress. We had a lot pop up saying that there's been movement here. Now, we saw this from Syriac maps come out then this morning. Situation Kherson front, during the last 3 days, Russian army was able to capture more areas of Krynky as Ukraine army start withdrawal from the last urban area under its control, which is under grey zone. During the next hours, it's expected that the area will be cleared by Russian troops. Now, we're talking in here, of course, this still grey zone. So the grey zone is not under anyone's control, and people claiming that Ukraine is withdrawing across from there. But it is important to note that grey zone is grey zone. It's not red, it's not blue, it's out of control there. And we saw that Rybar, of course, these are two more on the pro-Russian side, of course, with Rybar showing similar here, that this withdrawal, rotation, and a clear up to this urban area here. Now, A lot of this started from speculation and videos, photos that we haven't actually seen, but apparently the Russian officials have seen, of a flag being raised here. Now, let's have a look at how this came out. And I actually had a look through then the Russian Telegram chats. And I think this paints a better picture than we're getting from any sources at the moment, because we can look and go, okay, maybe it's not the degree that some of the pro-Russian sources are saying it. And we shouldn't ignore this. Buddy, look at that movement of arm. We shouldn't ignore this as a lot of the other sources are saying. So this was from Wagner's official channels here. Now, Krynky, Herson. The fighter specify the flag stood for only about an hour. This was a show-off task for the command. Now, I'd like to see this photo so we can geolocate it, but it's not public. About taking control over the southern settlement. There is no need to talk. There are heavy battles going on. So, of course, still heavily contested in this area. Now, this came then next. Soldiers work in Krynky systematically right to the bot and PM. The general gist of the various departments comes down to a complete lack of interaction. So, of course, heavy fighting here and a lot of problems here too. Attack aircraft do not have a direct connection with birds and artillery. So birds in this, they're either meaning from drones or with then the attack helicopters in the area. I'm assuming the attack aircraft, they're meaning the fighter aircraft dropping then the glide bombs here. Requests for fire support from the ground first go to the command, and then only then, if you're lucky, reach the artillery. The systematic work of electronic warfare has not been built. So this is something we have spoken about a lot with Russia, is they had, at least in the beginning, a hell of a lot of equipment, a hell of a lot of soldiers, but their combined arms, how the structure was structured, really, really lacked. And if they had that in power, the military would have been far, far more powerful on the ground. That this lack of interaction they talk about, this is combined arms. This all needs to be used as one. And this is something we hear about with fire support, artillery, mortars, all the time. If you look at the interviews I've done with Ukrainian soldiers, you hear the ones that I've done with foreign fighters and also with the Russians as well, that this fire support, how it goes, isn't how it would go for, like, say, when I was in the military, that it has to go to the command. So you're putting in a call for fire, we need artillery here, say, there's like a performer in NATO you use, it's like the same one, I need it here, goes to the artillery battery, they're hearing it on the fire net, and then they make up the decision on the ground to then send it or not. Where here it's going to a commander, then they sign it off, then it goes. So there's this extra step in it. And a lot of the times call for artillery and it just never, ever comes. And this is pointing at some of the problems that are happening for Russia in Krynky. There are also points regarding the designation of losses, namely documentary forgeries. So forging how many have actually been lost. The losses are recorded in such a way that they allegedly were not in Krynky. Hence the president's statement on the direct line and sanitary losses in Krynky. And this is something which I think anyone with their head screwed on should be suspicious about in this war, where neither side is, putting out publicly the losses in an area. And this is for a reason. We would do the same thing. But saying here that the designation of losses and forgery there of the names, so maybe not to look so bad in this one potential area. So let's have a look further on. Now, this is from what Rybar have said. Heavy fighting continues in Krynky area. Supplies to the AFU grouping in the village are significantly disrupted by weather conditions because they've got to cross over that water there, but have not been suspended. So still happening. Reports that the Russian armed forces allegedly managed to partially establish control of Krynky have not yet been confirmed. And I'm sure that photo will come out then at some point. Syriac says on the same thing we spoke about the grey zone. Grey area is not the same as control. The situation in Krynky is quite complicated for the Ukrainian side, but that does not mean the Russian troops are in the centre of the locality, as some reports say. We have to wait for graphic evidence to confirm this, so we can geolocate things as they go on there. And that's what we do like. But this shouldn't be ignored, like I've seen some of the other news channels ignoring that this actually happened, because we have a lot of at least written evidence, if you want to call it, coming out that this is happening. And I'm sure we will get updates across the time. And it's interesting to see some of these complaints off the front line too confirm some of our speculations about why Russia is really struggling in some areas. But what I have seen from Ukrainian sources is that Russia, they, of course, we had footage and we've talked about this, that they tried to launch an attack out of this road and really got hit and lost a hell of a lot of armoured vehicles, that now they're trying to set up then a defensive position along this road here. Now, I did have that road written down of what specifically it is, but I'll put that on the video if I can find exactly what this road is, to try and launch then a defensive work from here, to try and then have a hop so they can deliver equipment into here, and then further then try and push this back. This is a very important area for both Ukraine and Russia, for Ukraine to sustain this and Russia to take it back strategically. So I guess more will come of that as we speak. Now, we are going to then pick up on this map and we're going to head up to the Kremenar forest. So, of course, we have Avdiivka, we have Bakhmut up here. We haven't seen any changes in here over the past couple of days. It's really slowed down. Now, we looked on Surak yesterday and he spoke about some changes near Bilarivka. So let's have a look then on the deep state, and it is confirming that there was then this push up in here. So sometimes these maps are a day or so different to each other, but Russia has made a bit of ground in here. And I think there was well, at least I don't have the arrows in this one, but Russia changed slightly on the arrows from deep state where they're pushing in Kremenar. And then this is then backed up in Surak. Situation in the Lugansk front. Russian army continue their advances in the northeastern outskirts of Bilarivka here in the same area. So this is what we like. We like when things line up across the maps. It makes us happy as we know what is actually happening on the front there. Now, the MOD, Brits have put out a thing about the A-50 aircraft that was taken down. Of course, the AWACS. Now, the Il-20, we don't really know exactly how much damage has actually been caused there, but let's have a look what they say. The A-50, an airborne AWACS aircraft, almost certainly exploded and subsequently crashed into the Western Sea of Azov. Concurrently, the Russian Il-22 aircraft was reportedly damaged but landed in nearby Russian airfield. As of 15th of Jan, Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Valery Zaluzhny claimed responsibility for the loss of A-50 and damage to the Il-22. The possible successful target of A-50 mainstay by Ukraine is significant. It is likely that Russia will now be forced to reconsider limiting the operational areas of its aircraft. The A-50 is critical to the Russian air surveillance picture over the battle space. Now, of course, now that we've seen one of these taken down, this is the thing with this. We don't know if it was air defense from Russia and Ukraine has capitalized on that massive stuff up by, having a massive media win in this. The outcome's the same. The outcome that is the plane has gone down is the same. But we don't exactly know because there's a lot of varying information about was it taken by air defense, was it taken down by Ukraine. Either way, the aircraft isn't there. That what this is basically saying is they're forced to reconsider exactly where these go. Now, these have, from my reading, about a 650 kilometre range on the radar. So it's a hell of a long way. So let's say they can be down well within Russian territory somewhere here and still get a lot of coverage on the front. That said, the further away, it's not going to be as good, but the targeting in here, and we have spoken about how it could have been targeted too, so we're not 100% sure. The Russian Air Force possesses 8 A-50 airframes, which can likely cover the immediate operational impact. Yes, however, the increased stress on the remaining airframes, coupled with the loss of the crew, will likely constrain longer-term mission sustainability. This is something as well. Airframes for planes, they need a hell of a lot of work. Aircraft are a very complex thing. I know, no shit, Willie, but as soon as you miss an aircraft, of course, something is taking up how much more that is taking. So if you lose a 10th, well, each other bloody plane has to add percentages on to cover that in the air. And these are something that Russia desperately need, aircraft like this, once we start seeing more fighter aircraft from Ukraine in the air. Now, the numbers 8 to 15 is what I've read. So we're not exactly sure how many of these are in operational service. Could be more, could be less. We're not really sure. Like, even look at a country like Australia. You look at how many like Chinooks we've got, it'll say a number. But then if you actually look at how many are like combat operational, like how many could go into combat tomorrow with any airframe, it tends to be significantly less. But the air power is something with which Russia definitely has the numerical dominance on, but we haven't seen that dominance actually translate to the war as a whole, at least for gaining air superiority. And this is one notch out of the belt even further. Now, next week, we could see an answer to the funding that's currently stuck in US Congress, as Senate State Republican leader Mitch McConnell has told reporters that he expects the Senate to consider a bipartisan deal on Ukraine funding and on border security next week, saying we are hoping to get a credible border package. I anticipate that will be before us next week. But we are unsure exactly how this will look, and if and when it goes through, how much of the original $61 billion that was proposed to Ukraine will be there. Will all of it? We're not 100% sure. Now, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said Ukraine is already suffering from a lack of armaments. And if Ukraine folds, we're going to be suffering the consequences, not for months, but for years to come. Similar to what Biden has warned, that if Ukraine is allowed to fail, then it will be American soldiers on the ground, that it is cheaper to fund Ukraine now and quicker than to hold that back. US House Speaker Mike Johnson has said on Wednesday that the US House of Representatives will not finance the federal government for an omnibus spending bill, saying, with regard to Ukraine, we have needed and we have requested publicly, privately, in every forum, answers to the critical questions. What is the end game and the strategy in Ukraine? How will we have accountability for the funds? We need to know that Ukraine will not be another Afghanistan. Of course, talking about 20 years in a country at war. But however this unfolds, it will have a huge effect on this conflict moving forward. Now, I believe this money will likely go through, but the Western funding won't be at Ukraine's disposal forever. And Ukraine know this. This is why we see Ukraine building its domestic military industrial capability with private investment, private firms. And Defence Minister Rustem Umerov has said on December the 15th, the focus of our team's work is the localisation of weapons production in Ukraine, creating joint companies, engaging investments in the defence industry with our allies. And this, of course, in wartime comes with significant challenges from a lack of manpower, Russian targeting those sites, and of course, an uncertain future moving forward and the speculation there too. That said, companies will and are hedging their bets on Ukraine, as if Ukraine is victorious, then the whole military in Ukraine will need to be rebuilt, and that will have billions upon billions flowing into this area for decades to come. And this is mixed with, relative to Western Europe, a lot cheaper labour costs. On funding also then for reconstruction, a Ukrainian reconstruction bank has been set up by Kyiv with help from BlackRock and JP Morgan Chase. So this has set up a fund to raise public capital that could attract then private investments for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction, estimated to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. So everything from road networks, schools, power networks, water, you get the gist. There's hundreds of billions of dollars from the damage done here. And of course, private industries are going to want to get a piece of that pie. Speaking of reconstruction, Zelensky today has appealed to the World Economic Forum to receive some of the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets to rebuild Ukraine, saying, we have $300 billion of frozen Russian assets. They destroyed Ukraine. If we have $300 billion of Russian assets, we have to use them directly to rebuild what has been destroyed by Russian missiles. Why does your society have to think how to help? If the world has 300 billion, why not use it? Of course, the concern here is for the central banks of Europe is setting then a difficult legal precedent that could undermine global financial stability, meaning that other countries may think twice about placing their money in safe haven assets in Western banks. Bill Winters, the boss of the British bank Standard Chartered, has said, we may say it is worth it to do the right thing, which most of us would agree at the human level, it's the right thing. But I think central bankers have a right to be concerned. So of course, there's a difference in the moral, ethical argument and then the banking argument here as well. Continuing, in the long run, the US dollar plays such a central role that we do have to be careful about how we effectively weaponize it. It's already been quite weaponized through the application of sanctions. This would be a further extension of that. And we have seen China, who of course sits on the Permanent Security Council of the UN, call out the West, the US and the UN for weaponizing financial sanctions and how that would further affect into the future. Either way, wherever this war ends, the rebuild effort is going to be huge and it's going to be very costly. But if you're in the business of rebuilding roads, schools, military equipment, Ukraine is an absolute goldmine for the money that will flow in after the war, wherever that border settles. And there will be investors on the Russian side looking to rebuild the Russian military as well. And not only in Russia, places like China, North Korea. Private money is private money. That's what people do. They're looking for that venture capital to make money. And I've spoken in depth about this with a lot of things before. If you actually think this company who may fly this flag on this day of this month, give a shit about that? Not really. It's a marketing thing to move forward. Individuals in the company will care ethically and morally, but as far as the company, they care about stock price, that bottom end, investors, distribution of funds. Legends. I hope that you are having a fantastic day. Tomorrow will be my last video for a little bit, and I'll tell you more about that then. But have a great day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye-bye.